Next, a walk in the woods, rediscovering America on the Appalachian Trail by travel writer Bill Bryson. Former Education Secretary William Bennett looks at the president's private and public conduct in The Death of Outrage, Bill Clinton and the Assault on American Ideals. At number 10 is the second of Conversations with God, an Uncommon Dialogue by Neil Donald Walsh. This time, it's book 1. Next, Takaki reads excerpts and discusses his recent book, A Larger Memory, A History of Our Diversity of Voices. The book contains oral histories. The accounts are woven together from people of varying ethnic groups throughout American history. It includes narratives by former slaves, garment workers, and other immigrants. The author spoke at Cody's Books in Berkeley, California.
First of all, I'd like to thank Cody for bringing us together like this tonight and for giving me this opportunity to share my scholarship and also my stories with you. It's good to see some familiar faces out here and some friendly faces. But let me tell you about this book entitled A Larger Memory of Our Diversity with Voices. I'd like to open with a poem that I wrote. I'm not a poet, but this is what I wrote. In the sharing of our varied stories, we create our community of a larger memory. In other words, it's in this of our stories that we actually construct a community. And this is what I'm hoping sharing of stories will do. And these are life stories where individuals tell or have their stories retold. And these are life stories and voices of African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, Polish Americans, Jewish Americans, Irish Americans, Native peoples. And it's a conversation. These are life stories, and we become the listeners. And I'd like to begin by reading and talking from the opening chapter. It's entitled The Varied Carols of America, A Democratic History. And Varied Carols comes from Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass. 20 years ago, my Uncle Richard and I were talking story in his backyard. Talking story is a very favorite pastime in Hawaii. And so we were sharing these stories and we were enjoying the warmth of the Hawaiian sun. And all of a sudden, this Uncle Richard asked me a question. Now, I'm the first one in my family to go to college, and this is my favorite uncle, and I guess for him, he was proud of this nephew. You know, I graduated from college, I'd even gone on to graduate school, and here I was teaching at the University of California at Berkeley. So I was telling him about this book I was writing, entitled Iron Cages, Race and Culture in 19th Century America, a study of racial inequality as it related to African Americans, Native Americans, the Chinese, Mexicans, and also the Irish in the 19th century. And this Uncle Richard was retired, and he had never graduated from high school himself, but he was an intellectually alert individual. And he was very attentive to everything I had to tell him about the writing of this book. But then one afternoon, as I was telling him about this chapter that I was writing, his eyes lit up, and he said, "Hey, Ronald," in very mellifluous pidgin. He said, "Hey, Ronald, why you not go write a book about us, huh? Why you only write about those folks on the mainland? What about us?" He said, "After all, your mother was born on the plantation. I was born on the plantation. All of your aunties and uncles were born on the plantation. What about us?" And we were sitting in his backyard, and we were drinking beer. And I think I took a sip of beer and I said, why not? You know, what do you say to a favorite uncle who asks you to do a favor? A few days later, I found myself in the stacks of the University of Hawaii Library. I was on sabbatical at that time, writing Iron Cages. And in the stacks, I found that a book on the experiences of the plantation workers of Hawaii had not yet been written. And so I thought, oh, this might be a challenge for me to write such a book. So I spent about 3 years doing archival research. And then when it came time to write this book, I remembered that my Uncle Richard had asked me to write this book. And so I did not want to write a book like Iron Cages, which was a book designed mainly for graduate students and my colleagues, my faculty colleagues, a very intellectually dense book. But I still wanted to write a scholarly book, yet a book that would be readable and my uncle would find interesting to read. And so I began to pursue a different style of writing, narrative writing, the telling of stories, and the inclusion of voices. I wanted to write a history of the plantation experience at the eye-level view of the cane fields, what it was like to cut cane in the hot, humid cane fields, what it was like to hear the siren blasting at 4:30 in the afternoon saying, oh, it's pauhana time, you can go back to camps, and what it was like then to slide into the hot water of the furu, and what it was like also to raise children in these noisy camps, and also what it was like to go out on strike and shout for higher wages. And so this book then was published as Pauhana, Plantation, Life and Labor in Hawaii, a view of history from the bottom up, okay, democratic history, a history of the people, for the people, and also by the people, to let the people themselves tell you what it was like to experience the plantation in Hawaii. But out of that came other books, Strangers from a Different Shore, a history of Asian Americans, and then A Different Mirror, a history of multicultural America. And then following this came A Larger Memory. And we can think of these three books as kind of like a trilogy, you know, Iron Cages, A Different Mirror, and A Larger Memory. And A Larger Memory, the third volume then, is mainly a collection of life stories where I am not the narrator, but the people themselves become their own narrators. They tell me, and then they tell you what it was like to work in the garment factories of the Lower East Side. They tell you what it was like to be a slave in Mississippi. Okay. There is a theory embedded in this book, a methodological theory, and it comes from C. Wright Mills, the sociological imagination. C. Wright Mills said the sociological imagination is the study of the intersection between biography and history. Okay. So in this book, there is history. I do frame or offer a historical framework. And then woven into this historical framework are the actual voices of the peoples themselves. And let me just give you an example of what I mean by this intersection between biography and history. I have a chapter in here entitled Beyond the Pale, Jewish Immigrants in a Promised Land. And this is a chapter where I focus on the Jewish refugees. They were refugees fleeing pogroms in Russia. And they saw America as a promised land. Now, most of the women became factory workers working in the garment factories, the sweatshops of the Lower East Side. And so I begin this chapter by describing a moment that is still burning in the memory of Jewish America, and this was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911. So in my introduction, I do have, as a historian, a narrative of that horrible event. An emergency did happen on March 26, 1911, when a fire suddenly exploded at the Triangle Shirtwaist Company. 800 workers, mostly young women, were trapped in the burning building. A stream of fire tore up through the elevator shaft and stairways to the upper floors. Fire instantly appeared at all windows, and tongues of flames crept higher and higher along the walls to where little groups of terrified girls, workers, stood in confusion. Screaming, struggling, they jumped from windows, some from the 9th floor, their bodies smashing on the sidewalks. Unable to escape, 146 young workers, mostly Jewish and Italian, died in the smoke and heat of the inferno. The deaths of the many young people stirred great grief. 50,000 mourners marched in a mass memorial parade in memory of their dead daughters. Well, the living daughters also organized into a union, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, to demand safer working conditions, higher wages. But I came across this letter written to the editor of the Jewish Daily Forward. This is a community newspaper, and it had a little section in there called Bintel Brief. It was like a Dear Abby column. And so people could write to the editor to seek advice about what to do with personal problems, okay? Well, this is a letter published in the Jewish Daily Forward in 1914. It begins, "Dear worthy editor, I am a girl, 22 years of age, but I've already undergone a great deal in life." So she describes, how she came here as an immigrant. And then she met a man here and fell in love with him. And so she writes in her letter, "In time, I went to work at the famous Triangle shop." This is 3 years after the fire. "Later, my bridegroom also got a job there. Even at work, he wanted to be with me. My bridegroom told me then, 'We will both work hard for a while, and then we'll get married. We will save every cent, so we'll be able to set up a home, and then you'll be a housewife and never go to work in the shop again.' Thus my good bridegroom mused about the golden future. Then there was that terrible fire that took 147 young, blossoming lives. When the fire broke out, the screaming, the yelling, the panic all bewildered me. I saw the angel of death before me, and my voice was choked in my throat. Suddenly, someone seized me with extraordinary strength and carried me out of the shop. When I recovered, I heard calming voices and saw my bridegroom near me. I was in the street, rescued, and I saw my girlfriends jumping out of the windows and falling to the ground. I clung to my bridegroom and rescuer, but he soon tore himself away from me. 'I must save the other girls,' he said, and disappeared. I never saw him again. The next day I identified him in the morgue by his watch, which had my picture pasted under the cover. I fainted, and they could hardly bring me to. I made a vow that I would never get married. Besides that, I'm afraid that I will never be able to love another man. But this young man," now has another young man, "this young man doesn't want to leave me, and my friends try to persuade me to marry him and say everything will be all right. I don't believe it, because I think everything will be all right for me only in the grave. I decided to write to you because I want to hear your opinion. Respectfully, a faithful reader." You're probably wondering, well, what did the editor say? What did Bintel say in response? Okay, I'll read you his answer, a short answer. He said, "It is senseless for this girl to sacrifice her life in memory of her faithful bridegroom, since this would not bring him back to life. What the earth covers must be forgotten. She has suffered enough in her life already and is advised to take herself in hand and begin her life anew. But there were hundreds of these letters, sent to the Jewish Daily Forward. And so this is one way of recovering these voices and these life stories. But you can see here the intersection between history, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire that led to, this tremendous union movement in this country, and, a woman who was caught in that fire, who was rescued, but who lost her fiancé in the fire. I'm going to skip forward then from 1911, 1914 to 1992. I've been teaching here at Berkeley now for 26 years. I estimate that I must have taught over the years over 10,000 students, because some of my classes are huge classes with 500 in them. But I also have the privilege of teaching seminars, small group research classes. In fact, one of my students is right here, Jose Palafox. And what I tell these students in these seminars is that our parents, our grandparents, are worthy of scholarly attention, because they were actors in history too. And think about the sociological imagination and how their lives intersected with history. Well, in this case, this is one of my students, Samantha Lee, whose mother had emigrated from South Korea, and she tells her story then. This is Samantha's mother telling her story about her intersection, or the intersection of her life with the LA explosion of April 29th, 1992. In fact, we still remember those images beamed out of LA that night of April 29th, 1992. Images of black smoke rising to the skies above Los Angeles, the Korean stores burning out of control, and then the murderers melee in the streets. Well, Samantha Lee's mother owned a store that was burned to the ground. Okay. When I talked to Samantha Lee about, her mother's experience and about the LA riot of 1992, Samantha told me that she was very dismayed by the way the press represented Korean Americans. We had images of Korean merchants carrying guns, defending their stores. And we also had a whole bunch of statistics, how many Korean stores were burned and how much money they lost and so forth. But she said, Professor Takaki, what we didn't get from the media representations was what it was like, to be on the other side of that counter in these convenience stores. What it was like to see your store burning down, okay? And so I said, well, this might be a chance for you to retell your mother's story, okay? So what we have here in Samantha Lee's paper, which is published in this book, is her mother's story told to Samantha, and Samantha retelling the story to us now. And this is a story of her mother, Sun Soon Kim. And it opens, I, Sun Soon Kim, was born on May 20th, 1949. Before my one-year-old birthday, Korea was in the midst of the Korean War. Okay. So a lot of things happened to her, and I can't read the whole paper here. But I'd like to just read some segments from it. So Samantha Lee's mother, parents have arranged her marriage, okay? And this is a man that she had never met before. And she said, no, I want to choose my own husband. And she was in love with a man. So what did she do? She defied her parents. She married the man she loved, okay? And anyway, this is Samantha Lee's mother talking now. It's September 1977. We emigrated to America. There were significant changes in the United States. Immigration law, so that in 1965, the United States opened its door to family reunification. By 1977, most of Di, this is her husband, most of Di's family was already established and settled in California. We were the last of the family to immigrate. So when Di announced one morning that he was going to America, I had a decision to make: follow him or stay. Since I really had no choice, I picked up my family and bags, and off to America I followed. What was in store for me was beyond anything I had ever imagined. So, Sun Soon Kim comes over here, and she's a spunky individual. You can already tell, you know, because she decided to make choices for herself about who she would be marrying. She comes over here, and she gets jobs, you know, that she's really not qualified for. But nevertheless, she pretends that she's qualified. You know, she works for a bank, and she's still trying to strengthen her English language skills. But nevertheless, she's a fighter and also a survivor. And she and her husband then save their money. And then she has a cousin, I think. And they decided that they were going to become small business owners, okay? Now, they're living in the Bay Area, but her cousin says the place to begin a business is in Los Angeles. So together, my cousin and I bought a little shopping center that housed 5 stores with our life savings. She took 3 of them because she put in more money than I did, and I took the other 2. Between the 2 of us, we had a market, Korean pastry shop, electronics store, clothing store, and a beauty salon. The location was great, right on Olympic Boulevard in the heart of the Korean community. So she's doing well, and, you know, she is really pleased because now she can afford to put her kids through college. Huh? Yeah, one of them is Samantha, her daughter. But then she's watching television here in the Bay Area, and reports come out of Los Angeles showing the riot and the burnings. And so she frantically flies down to LA, and she gets down there. The images on television were so incoherent, almost like a dream. Was this for real? That night was the longest and darkest night I had ever experienced in my life. It was not the anticipation that was killing me, but the not knowing was. The family and I took the first flight to Los Angeles. I did not know what to expect. Koreatown was blocked off, but no one was going to stop me from going to my stores. Koreatown looked like it went to war. I guess if I was ever in a war, I know what the end results would look like. I could still see smoke rising from buildings and Korean merchants trying to salvage any remains of a dream. Since cars couldn't drive through, we parked our car and started to walk. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, like something from the movies. I felt like I was on the movie screen, walking through the war zone, and people in the movie theater were watching this. Words cannot describe the emotions that I was feeling or the sights that I saw. A block of 2 before we reached my stores, my cousin ran out to stop me. She was crying and trying to hold me back from seeing the stores. I had to see them. I wanted to see with my own eyes that everything I saw on television the night before was real. My husband and my cousin and my husband were trying to hold me back. No one was going to stop me from seeing my stores. I kicked and fought and finally pried myself free and ran and ran. I ran without looking back. I did not care. I just wanted to see. I honestly wasn't prepared for what I was about to see. In front of me was the remaining rubble of the stores that I had poured my money, sweat, and time into. Everything I had worked so hard to build was crumbled in front of me. I had spent my whole life building a dream that was destroyed in one night. Knowing that I had built this for the kids' future and my future was unbearable. Now we had no future. This realization broke me. I crumbled in the midst of anguish and pain. Well, she goes on, however, and she says to her daughter, even though a part of me died that day, I decided that it was not going to kill me. I was going to fight and fight hard for what I believed in. I was not going to let the riots beat me. It may have, but now I was fighting back. So this is the story of Samantha Lee's mother. But as you can see, you know, these are complicated stories, intricate stories, but these stories intersect with, you know, important moments in history. And there are other stories in this book. But there's one story I wanted to share with you, and this is where I'm going to end my talk so that you can ask me questions. While doing research for this book, I came across a fact of history that I wish every American would know. A fact of history that I wish every American would know. And I present this fact in one of my chapters in this book, one of the narrative chapters. And you're wondering, well, Professor Takaki, what is that fact that I wish every American would know? Well, I'm hoping you'll read this book, okay? Yeah. But that fact is presented in my chapter entitled, A Nation That Did Not Perish from the Earth. We take for granted living in a nation called the United States of America. You know, here we are, we're in Berkeley. Berkeley is a city in a country called the United States. But we should not take our nation for granted. In the spring of 1863, our nation almost dissolved. We almost became a Bosnia in the spring of 1863. The North was actually losing the Civil War at that time. The Civil War had been underway for 2 years, and white Union soldiers were returning home to New York, Boston, Cleveland, Chicago. They had completed their 2-year enlistment. They were going home. There was no draft law, and there were virtually no new white volunteers for the Union Army. The North was getting tired of fighting this war, and the Union Army had suffered some terrible defeats. Up to this point, Lincoln had refused to allow the Union officers to enlist black men because he did not want the border states to secede, because then it would be all over. But in the spring of 1863, Lincoln realized that he had no choice. So he sent out orders to his generals in the field. He said, start enlisting black men as fast as you can. And General Lorenzo Thomas, who was fighting in the Mississippi Valley, started enlisting black men. And most of these were escaped slaves who were desperate to get into this war. They wanted to be armed so that they could liberate, they could free their wives and their children still in slavery. And within weeks, General Lorenzo Thomas had 20 regiments of black men in blue. And so when Lincoln went to Gettysburg in November, he went there to express his gratitude to these black soldiers. At that point, there were 200,000 black soldiers, most of them from the South. And he told his staff before he got on that train to Gettysburg, he said, if it were not for these 200,000 black men in blue, we would have to abandon the war effort in 3 weeks. Okay. This is our commander-in-chief of the armed forces saying this. This is not me, the historian. Okay. In other words, if it were not for them, you know, this nation of the people, for the people, by the people, would have perished from the earth. Okay. So when Lincoln went to Gettysburg, he was expressing his gratitude to these black men in blue. And he said 7 years ago, this nation was founded, dedicated to the proposition of equality. And here he meant equality for everyone, regardless of race. What Lincoln had done at Gettysburg was to redefine the aim of the war. Up to that point, the aim of the war was the preservation of the Union. Now the aim of the war was also equality. Okay. So this is a fact that I wish every American would know, that these black men represented the decisive difference in preserving this Union. Okay. This United States of America that we live in today is a legacy of these black men in blue. And this is a fact that I wish every one of us in America would know, because I think it would change the way we think about America, the way we think about our past, and also the way we think about African Americans today, especially as we enter the 21st century, you know, a time when whites will become a minority. Hey, think about that, huh? They're already a minority in California, but there will be a minority group throughout America sometime in 2050. So just imagine, we will all be minorities, huh? And it's not a bad thing to be a minority. You know, I've been one all my life. But just think about it. When we're all minorities, well, what does it mean then to be an American? But this is why we need a larger memory, okay? Because a larger memory allows us to think of ourselves and to embrace ourselves in all of our diversity. And it's in the sharing of these varied stories that we create a community. And then out of this community, hopefully, you know, can come policies and can come the reconstruction of our society and our economy, so that this nation can live up to its founding proposition, to use Lincoln's language, the proposition that we are all equal. But let me stop there. I'd like to give you a chance to ask me some questions about the making of this book and about some of my pursuit for a more inclusive, more multicultural history, but also, always remember, a more accurate history, okay? I think a more inclusive history is a more accurate history. I think that when we leave out the study of entire groups of people, we disunite America. You know, when Arthur Schlesinger Jr., for example, writes a book entitled The Age of Jackson and leaves out the histories of the Cherokees, Choctaws, and Chickasaws who were removed during the Age of Jackson, and leaves out the history of slavery during the Age of Jackson, I think he disunites us, you see. So let me end there, and let me hear what you may have to say. You know, you're part of this larger memory too. Yeah. So who'd like to begin with a question? Yeah.
Were any of the interviews done in foreign tongue and translated?
Oh, were these in translation?
Any of them?
Yeah, yeah. Some of, I think these letters to the Jewish Daily Forward, many of them were in Yiddish. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with Samantha Lee's story, you know, she had to conduct that interview in Korean. Yeah. So we had to translate. And then with Jose Palafox's story, Jose has a great story about, entitled The Song of El Norte, you know, the life story of Camelia Palafox, Jose's mother. And I guess you conducted a lot of your interviews in Spanish. Yeah, I think that's part of the you know, this larger memory. Our diversity of stories told in a diversity of languages, and how we're all Americans. Yeah.
Regarding your statement of the consolidation of the Union with the Civil War, wouldn't you say that some people like Hawaiian people, the Puerto Rican, Philippines, would rather wish that they never consolidated the Union? Because after that they started a big intervention around the world with the Spanish American War, yeah, and all that. So Those people are still colonies, like Hawaii is a state, but practically a colony. Puerto Rico is a colony. Philippines was a colony for 50 or so years. So not everybody was happy with the consolidation.
That's right. We also have a varied history too. You're right. You know, had this United States disintegrated in the spring of 1863, there would not have been the Spanish-American War and the annexation of the Philippines. Also, there wouldn't have been the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima because there would have been no atomic bomb. Huh? Yeah. So you know, it would have been a different history. I don't deny that, but this is the way history happened, and you know, I still think that that this nation, you know, it's one of the few countries in the world founded on a principle of equality. You know, this Declaration of Independence. I can remember visiting Japan several years ago, and I was riding in a car with a very eminent Japanese historian, and we were talking about history, comparing the history of Japan with the history of the United States. And I asked my colleague who was driving the car in Tokyo, I said, is there anything in the history of Japan, a document like the Declaration of Independence or like the Gettysburg Address? And he drove and drove and drove. And then 5 minutes later, he said no, you know? Yeah, so I think that, you know, still this country, for me, and I think for many Americans, represents a hope in that we do have a principle that recognizes our rights of equality. Yeah.
You say that knowing about history might be a technique for uniting the country or bringing awareness of our multicultural roots. There's a historical perspective, there's a moral perspective in terms of compensatory justice for those who've been denied. What do you think turns the trick? In my mind, the political efforts to compensate those who've been denied through affirmative action, the intellectual approach to make facts known to people. With all that, there seems to be the resistance to doing right, to rectifying wrongs and preparing for a future on a level playing field. What do you suspect might turn the trick?
Well, first of all, you know, why can't we do it right? Well, part of it is that we don't know ourselves and we don't know our history. So how can we do it right? You know, how can we struggle for affirmative action when most people in California don't know this fact that every American, I wish, would know? You see, because if we all knew this fact about how we are, you know, we live in a legacy of these black men in blue, then maybe we would rethink, you know, our opposition to affirmative action. So I think that, you know, there has to be this kind of historical awareness of how we are obligated to one another. The ties that bind us to each other, you know, are ties of obligation, you see. But also, we have to have a deeper and a more intricate understanding of what equality is, you see, and how this equality that is denied in many ways on a structural basis, so that we're not even consciously discriminating, but our life chances are defined by where we live and where we go to school, so that a university doesn't even have to discriminate against blacks and Latinos, say, because they don't have the SAT scores and they don't have the GPAs, okay, because they attend urban schools rather than suburban schools. And so there is this uneven playing field to begin with. But this is where I think what we need to do is to not only know this history, but to have a sophisticated understanding of de facto discrimination and how this then leads to dreams deferred. I myself think, though, that we gain great clarity in understanding history by addressing the issues of the present, okay? I've been, deeply involved in the struggle against Prop 209, okay? Here in California, and then I-200 in Washington. I've debated Ward Connolly. And what I find happening to me is that I gain a greater clarity of understanding history through my political activism, through my struggles for equality, struggles against Proposition 209. And so I guess what I'm trying to share with you is how we, I would urge us not to separate the intellectual activity from the political activity, but how they do weave themselves together. And it's in this kind of intersection that we gain greater clarity in terms of the political issue and greater clarity in terms of this knowledge of history. But in the end, if I can give you a complicated answer here, in the end, we're going to have to find economic solutions to these problems. Okay, it's not just knowing history, but we're going to have to figure out how to, revitalize the economies of our inner cities. Okay, so we have to connect it to the problems of the globalizing economy. We also have to rethink the way our tax system is structured. Right now, our school districts are unequal. And that's because our school districts depend upon property taxes for their financing. So we may have to think about shifting the financing of our schools away from property taxes and towards, say, a state income tax, and then redistribute resources more evenly. But I don't hear, our policymakers thinking in these terms, what to do about our economy and what to do about our system of taxes to finance our schools. But I think in the end, we're going to have to address economic solutions. And it does go back to this Declaration of Independence. We're all equal. But what does it mean to be equal? It means that we're entitled to these unalienable natural rights of life, liberty, and also the pursuit of happiness. Okay, and I think when we like have affirmative action, we're opening up equality of opportunities so that we can pursue happiness as individuals, and not have race count against us or our class count against us, but this happiness has to have a material base, okay? Yes. And this is where it has to lead to more opportunities and employment, more material prosperity. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I have 3 questions.
3 questions, okay.
I came with one and now I've added 2 more. The one I came with was about Picture Bride, which I gather you helped work on that film. That's very much about the film witness that you were mentioning. And that one is about how I had some discomfort when I left the film, which I otherwise enjoyed profoundly, about the fact that it seemed that there were no Hawaiians in the film. And they just were so invisible. I was uncomfortable, so I wanted to hear what you thought of that. That was one question. The other is I wanted to hear what happened in Washington. I mean, some friend of mine said they hardly have enough black people in Washington to be that prejudiced against. So what was that about? That was a remark that was made. Another one was made is, when are white women going to understand that they're the major beneficiaries, as Jesse Jackson's always saying, of affirmative action, and get their act together and fight for it? I mean, the disaster, and particularly the numbers, how badly we lost.
What's your third question then?
I now forgot what the well, that's enough. You can do
Oh, okay,
also.
okay.
I know what it was. It was about Ward Connolly, how the debate went. I'm dying to know.
How did the debate go? Some of you were there for the debate. I can give you, an objective assessment of the debate. but the first question about Picture Bride, I don't know how many of you have seen that movie Picture Bride, but I was a scholar advisor to the project, and that project was influenced by my book, Pauhana, Plantation Life and Labor in Hawaii. But I wanted them to present a different story, actually, because in Pauhana, I have all these workers coming from different countries, you know, not just Japan, but also from the Philippines, from Korea, from China, from Portugal, from Puerto Rico, from Norway, and coming together to work in these cane fields, and how they began sharing cultures with one another, began sharing foods like, you know, Portuguese sweetbread and sushi and sashimi and so forth, you see. And so there was the making of a multicultural community in Hawaii. And that did not come across in the book, in the Picture Bride movie. It focused mainly on the Japanese. There were few references to the Filipinos, but that was it. And you see, in Pauhana, I end the book with a massive strike, the strike of 1920, where Filipinos and Japanese went out on strike together. In fact, you had Japanese newspapers publishing editorials saying, and these are immigrant Japanese, okay? They're from Japan. And these are newspapers in Japanese. And here you have these Japanese editors saying, stand shoulder to shoulder with the Filipinos. Their struggle is your struggle. And you know, these are Japanese immigrants from Meiji Japan, very nationalistic Japan. But nevertheless, in Hawaii, they transformed themselves. Okay, they became multicultural, multi-ethnic. They realized that class was more important to them than their nationality. So that's how I wanted Picture Bride to end, with that strike. Huh? But there were only references to how a strike was underway. And in the end, we don't know whether or not a strike occurred in the movie. But all we know is that the love story, you know, came together. And I thought, oh, okay, I guess it is a love story, you see. Yeah, I was a little disappointed there too, because I thought this would have been a time to have presented through the television media this portrait of a multi-ethnic workforce in Hawaii. Okay, and the movie did not do that. Okay.
But about the Hawaiians themselves.
They were not there in the movie either. And the Hawaiians are in my book, Pauhana. They were the original plantation workers, you say. Yeah. What happened in the state of Washington, I-200? Oh, man, I was really hoping we'd beat Ward Conley up there, because I-200 is the replica of Proposition 209. It did not use the term affirmative action. Instead, it used the term preferential treatment again. And again, Ward Conley had to go up there and bring outside money in to hire people to gather signatures, you see. And they used the same arguments. So affirmative action represented preferential treatment and quotas and so forth. And they racialized it, okay? Affirmative action was for women, for racial minorities only. Now, the anti-200 forces were pretty savvy, because they had learned the lesson of Prop 209. You know, they made it very clear that the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action have been women, especially white women. And when I went up there, I underscored this point and also said, white men too. Look at all those white men married to these white women, huh? Who have access to law school and medical school, and who now are professionally employed. You know, they're beneficiaries of affirmative action. But we lost. The vote was 58% in favor of I-200. What assessment do we make of this? Well, I think, again, you know, we lost in terms of those 30-second sound bites, huh? You know, saying that affirmative action was really preferential treatment, quotas, and so forth. And it also showed the power of outside money, you see, because had Ward Conley not brought in outside money, they would not have even qualified for the ballot. The lesson that I've learned from Prop from I-200's defeat is this. I think the best way to stop Ward Connolly and his campaign, and it is a campaign against affirmative action, is to stop him right here in California. Okay. You know, I've drafted a pro-affirmative action initiative, hopefully to be placed on the ballot for the 2000 election. My thinking is that if two Hayward State professors, you know, Glenn Clustered and Tom Wood, can write an anti-affirmative action initiative, there should be a Berkeley professor capable of writing a pro-affirmative action initiative. So I've drafted one, and you can find it in the October 5th issue of The Nation magazine. Okay, and I'm only the author of this initiative, but I don't think of myself as the owner of it. You know, you can pick it up, you can appropriate it. You don't even have to footnote me. You know, you can say, this is my initiative. The California Equality Initiative is mine. It's not Takaki's. That's okay. But do something with it, okay? I'd like to see some civil rights organizations, labor unions, student organizations file this petition in Sacramento and go out and begin to gather signatures, because I think that's the only way we're going to stop Ward Connolly and the attacks on affirmative action. Stop it. No, it's not. Okay, the Boat Law School students had one, and they filed. Theirs called for affirmative action for education only, you see. And they said that they would try to put theirs on the ballot for the 1998 election. So when I met with them in November of '97, I said, okay, I'm going to hold mine back, and I'll support you. And I supported them. I went to their events, I spoke for them and helped them raise money and so forth. And they made a heroic effort. They gathered over 300,000 signatures. And these were all student volunteers, okay? But they didn't make it. I think that mine has a greater chance of making it, because mine states this. It states that in order to act affirmatively in the promotion of equality of opportunity, it shall be lawful for the state of California to consider race, gender, or socioeconomic class disadvantage in the selection of qualified individuals for university admission, for employment, and for government contracting. You know, this is what I was trying to tell the Boat Law School students. I said, look, we need to make this more broadly based. We can't just focus on education. We have to focus on employment, because then you get the labor unions involved. But also, we have to include government contracting, because then we have all these women and minority small businesses that will contribute then to a campaign to restore affirmative action. So that's the CEI, the California Equality Initiative. Okay. Question number 3, Ward Connolly. You can call KQED Radio and ask them to send you a copy of the tape of that debate, and then you can make up your own mind as to how that debate went. But I thought it was a good debate in that it gave me a chance to explain what affirmative action is, why we need it, and also how do we do it, you see. It gave Ward Connolly a chance to scorn me, you know. But that's okay, you know. What I mean, if you can't take the heat, you know, I need to get out of the kitchen. Yeah.
What do you think is really behind his opposition to affirmative action? Is it his patronage? Is it money? I mean, or does he really?
Yeah, you'll have to ask Ward Connolly why he's doing it. You know, I think there are like partisan interests, huh? Because Ward Connolly would not have gotten the money and the support he did had it not been for the Republican National Committee. Okay, and of course it was Governor Pete Wilson who first, you know, used the issue of affirmative action to announce his candidacy for the Republican nomination for the presidency, you see. So I think that there are some political motives here. but you know, I'm willing to give Ward Connolly the benefit of the doubt. It's, you know, that he believes in merit and individualism, but what he needs to understand is that this idea of merit is an illusion. How do we define merit? For example, do SATs really define the merit of a student? When we know that SAT scores and family incomes rise together? And what about GPA? Does the GPA really measure merit accurately? Well, this university, Berkeley, for this fall, rejected 800 African American and Latino students with 4.0 GPA. They had done everything Ward Connolly had asked them to do. They studied hard, they sacrificed, they got perfect grades, and yet they were still rejected. Why were they rejected? Well, for one thing, their SAT scores were not as high as the white and Asian students who were accepted. But these black and Latino students had pretty high SAT scores, 12, 1300, much higher than most of our SAT scores, huh? But what was happening was this: if you had a white student with a 4.0 GPA and a black student with a 4.0 GPA, but this black student had a 1300 SAT and this white student had a 1350 SAT, the white student got in. Come on now, let's get real, huh? Is that a significant difference? But there was another reason why so many of these 800 Latino and black students with 4.0 GPAs were rejected. They didn't know this, but they were competing against students with 4.2, 4.3, 4.5 GPA. And when I discovered this fact, I thought, how the heck does one get a 4.2 GPA? Well, Berkeley awards what it calls bonus points, an extra point for an advanced placement course and also for an honors course. And so it's possible to get 5.0 for a course. And these advanced placement courses and honors courses are offered in great abundance in the elite suburban high schools, public high schools. But they're scarce in the inner city and urban high schools, you see. So how do we measure merit, you see? And this is where I think we do have a disagreement. Ward Connolly and I do have a disagreement about how we measure merit. And I'm saying that the way we are measuring merit right now with our excessive reliance on SATs, which is an artificial instrument of measuring merit, and our awarding of bonus points for AP courses and advanced placement courses, that we might not be getting the brightest and the best students here at Berkeley, okay? So we do have a very definite difference in terms of how we measure merit and how we define merit. Yeah.
I have a question actually that brings us back to the larger memory. And I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you selected, how you set about selecting the stories you did choose, whether it was, one of the examples you gave was the fire. Did you choose a historical event and then try to uncover narratives? Or was it the other way around?
To be honest with you, when we go back, say, to the 18th century and 19th century, the selections are not expansive. So what dictated the selection was the existence of these stories, okay? You know, I have the story from Olaudah Equiano, who was an African who had been captured in a tribal conflict and who had been sold as a slave and came over here. And he was purchased then by an Englishman who took him to London. And he learned how to speak English, but also he earned some money and was able to purchase his own freedom, you see. And then he wrote an autobiography. But it's not like we have an abundance of these, you know, narratives written by slaves themselves, you see. And so I had to choose Equiano's story. So that was what dictated the choice there. But I was trying to make sure that I included a broad range of different groups, okay? So I made sure that I included Puerto Ricans, Polish immigrants, Italian immigrants, Native peoples, And with Native peoples, I have Black Elk Speaks in it, but I also have unknown, anonymous Native Americans. Like I have a story of a Winnebago Indian who becomes an Indian, quote unquote, in a Wild West show, you see, after the end of the frontier. And I also came across these letters written by Ira Hayes to his mother and father. Ira Hayes, you know, was the Pima Indian who was photographed by Joe Rosenthal, you know, planting that flag on the mountain, Mount Suribachi in Iwo Jima. And he wrote these letters, and these letters were saved. And so now we have Ira Hayes telling his own story about what it was like to be a Marine, you see, and what it was like to engage in mendacity, lies. Because, you see, Ira Hayes was not there for the planting of that flag at the moment when Suribachi was taken. But what happened was Joe Rosenthal went up there and he asked them to reenact it, you see? Yeah. And then he took the picture, he put it on the wire, and Ira Hayes became famous. He said, hey, but I wasn't there, you see? But the Marines told him, that's all right, just be quiet, you know, because we want you to be on this fundraising, bond-raising campaign, you see. So we have Ira Hayes' story. But you see, so I'm trying to select from a broad range of different groups, but I also have to make sure that, you know, these stories are available. In some cases, I made sure that these stories got written because I had my students write these stories, okay? Like Jose was here, and Jose needed to graduate. He needed to do a senior thesis, and he was doing research already on the border, okay? What happened? You told me about your mother? Yeah, about how she came here illegally and so forth, and you know, worked as a cleaning woman, and how she brought you over here illegally. And I thought, hey, Jose, you know, we just have like these statistics about these Mexican illegals coming over here, or we have like videotapes of them, you know, shown on Wilson, you know, campaign commercials, huh? These shadowy figures running down, you know, Interstate, 5, huh? But we don't like have a chance to see these illegals as men and women with minds and wills and also voices. So so that's where that story came from then, you see. Oh, but talking about Jose's mother is also Samantha's mother. Everywhere throughout A Larger Memory, did not present in this history, you know, his story, huh? I wanted to make sure that we also presented her story. So her stories are very present in A Larger Memory. We have time for just one more question. Who hasn't had a chance to ask a question yet? You'd like, okay, this is the last. Okay, is that it? Just one more question? Oh, you have one too? Okay, 2 questions, one here and one there. Why don't you just say it side by side and then I'll answer both questions, not at the same time. Okay, you.
Asian American studies, and you have to separate Asian studies, Asian American studies,
Yeah.
how they're divergent and convergent
Yeah.
at the same time, and how would you address that
Okay.
as history teaching to younger children at an elementary level,
Okay.
or junior high level?
Okay, and what's your question back there?
I was wondering what role you thought religion would or could play in an openly multicultural America.
Okay. The first question. I have a faculty appointment in the Department of Ethnic Studies and also the Asian American Studies program, which is one of the programs in the Department of Ethnic Studies, along with Chicano Studies and Native American Studies. And originally, initially, African American Studies was also a program in the Department of Ethnic Studies. And in Asian American Studies, the struggle for us for a long time has been to distinguish our field from Asian studies, okay? The study of Tokugawa Japan is not Japanese American studies. It's not the study of our experiences here in the United States. So we had to make a clear distinction between Asian studies and Asian American studies. However, when you think this through, you realize that there's a good deal of blurring occurring, okay? You've read my book, Strangers from a Different Shore? Okay. Notice there, in order to understand why the immigrants left Japan and China, the Philippines, I had to learn the history of China, the Philippines, Korea, and so forth. What was happening there, you see. So in other words, there is an intersection between Asian studies and Asian American studies. In other words, you can't study the peoples of the United States in isolation from the world. You know, Melville said, you know, you cut the vein of an American and you spill the blood of the world. Well, in order to understand America, you have to understand the world. And so Asian American studies, I think, interpenetrates Asian studies here. Okay? But I think we still need to make a distinction in terms of where the focus should be. And you were saying, well, you know, what are we going to teach our children, the younger generation? Well, they are Asian Americans, right? And they want to know what it means to be Asian and also American. What does it mean for us to be Asian in America? Huh? So the focus for Asian American studies will have to continue to be the focus of our experiences here in the U.S. context. Now, about religion. Could you tell me something about why you're asking this question? You're studying to become a... Okay.
I am half Japanese, half white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And BCA is a very ethnically, for the most part, ethnically Japanese-American institution, but that seems to be changing. Also Christianity and Buddhism and Islam and all these various religions, can they coexist? You know, I think about it doctrinally as a master's student of religion, but I'm wondering also religion as a part of ethnicity and what role you think that might play.
You're pursuing this as your future. How would you answer your question? You know, you think religion can help us get along with one another, work it out with one another?
Potentially, it can help us all live together. Potentially, it can divide us along the most severe lines. It has the potential for the ultimate good and the ultimate evil, I think, depending.
Oh, okay. So the answer is an ambiguous one, huh? Yeah, because, you know, when you think about a lot of the wars that we've had, they've been wars of religion, huh? Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think, can Christianity and Buddhism coexist? Can Asian Buddhists coexist with non-Asian Buddhists?
What's your answer to that question? Can Christianity and Buddhism coexist? How would you answer that question?
I'm getting there.
You're getting there. Yeah. Well, how would I answer that question? You know, I almost became a minister myself. Yeah. In fact, I went to college, and my bishop told me that history would be a good major to prepare you for seminary. I was going to become an Episcopalian priest, okay? And then something happened between my junior and senior years. I changed my mind. I thought, oh, I don't want to become a priest. I don't want to go to seminary. But here, I was a history major. You know, I had one more year left, and I thought, what am I going to do with a degree in history? You know, some of you are faced with those questions. So what are you going to do with your degree? And he said, well, I'll come to Berkeley, get a PhD in American history. And that's why I'm here. But I keep thinking about myself and how, in many ways, you know, I'm still driven, you know, by that kind of ethical passion, huh? Yeah, because you know, my lectures are like sermons, you know. Yes, yeah. I'm trying to say, hey, there is something called justice. You see, yeah, and we have to, you know, try to create a just society. You see, and a just society for me is a society that respects everyone as equals, and we are all entitled to these rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you can say, oh, that sounds very religious, Professor Takaki. You know, yeah, there is a moral passion, you know, in my scholarship and in my teaching. But I don't know if I would call that a religion, you see. Yeah, but yeah, I decided not to become a minister. But you know, I respect you and what you're doing. But I think we need to end now. But thank you for, you know, letting me share my scholarship with you. Thank you.
Please don't go away. I will be taking Ronald downstairs, so you can join us downstairs. Okay, he'll be signing books downstairs. Thank you for coming.
Oh, hello.
I'm Barry Shapiro.
Oh, Barry, yeah.
Can I ask you to sign my book before I go
Sure,
downstairs?
Barry, yeah.
We like to sign them. I'm going to be involved in the national campaign to stop the Kennedy McDonald attack.
So, and she doesn't know I'm buying this for her.
Oh, so these
And
are
my
for
other
two
daughter,
daughters.
yeah, my other daughter too will start Berkeley High
Okay.
in a year.
What are your daughters' names?
Rose and Lily.
Rose
Yeah.
and Lily with two,
One L.
One L.
Yeah, Lily. Like the two. And, we've heard a lot about her ethnic studies class at home, so she's been thinking a lot.
But one of your daughters came tonight.
One of my daughters, who just started Berkeley High and is in an ethnic studies class, and it's
She should
Berkeley High is kind of
take this book with her to her class.
yeah, she
share it with
should.
her
Yeah,
fellow students
I
and her
hope she
teacher.
will. Yes. It's opened a world to her because she came from a very small school here in Berkeley, and going to a school of 3,000.
Oh,
so
yes, a culture shock.
It's culture shock, yeah. She went to the French school in Berkeley, so she speaks French, and now she's taking German and French, and so she came from, you know, a graduation class of 30 to a school of 3,000, and this is the ethnic studies has been, she's talked about it a lot, and
Well,
it's been good for her.
yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my scholarship
well,
with
thank
them.
you
Because,
for, you know, it's
you know, I'm thinking about the 21st century and what kind of world, you know, these young people will be entering. And so I'm writing my scholarship for them because they're going to enter this world when we will all be minorities. You know? Like as Miranda said in The Tempest, oh, brave new world that has such people in it. Oh, we're going to be all these people.
That's right, yeah.
You know, I hope that, you know, we will make the right choices for this coming multicultural millennium.
I hope so too, yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, hello. Yeah.
Are you teaching any classes this semester? Or?
I'm on sabbatical for the whole year.
Oh,
writing another book. Yeah. Are you a student?
I graduated from Cal in '97.
Oh.
But I still live in Berkeley, so.
Oh, so you went into audit or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So you've already graduated.
Yeah.
What are you doing now?
I'm teaching in the open school.
Oh, what, you teach history?
You know, I graduated in history, but I'm working with the math programs.
Okay, well you can still share this book with your students. What's your name?
Philip.
P-H-I-L-L?
1 L.
1 L and L-I-P?
Yeah. So what is the, I don't know, just being at Berkeley in the mid-90s, you know, the Asian plurality and holding the deciding sort of voice in the affirmative action debate. You know, it's been very strange and interesting because on the one hand, you know, Asian Americans are getting in on the quote-unquote merit, you know, standard, but being a minority, you know, I think most Asian Americans identify with some of the same things that other minorities do.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but for Prop 209, Asian Americans voted against Prop 209. Exit polls show that 61% of Asian Americans voted against Prop 209. Of course, they voted against it because we know we're beneficiaries of affirmative action. You know, now you can go into San Francisco and see Asian American policemen. 20 years ago, you didn't see them. In fact, we have a chief of police named Fred Lau. But the other thing is that I think Asian Americans are becoming conscious of their identity as not only Asian but also American. You know, I talked to a lot of Asian American students before the election, and they told me that they would be voting against Prop 209. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, Professor Takaki, without affirmative action, my brother and my sister would have a better chance of getting into Berkeley. But I can't just think about what's good for my family and what's good for my ethnic community. They said, I'm an Asian American. I'm an American too.
They're thinking as citizens, deciding what is right rather than what's in their own
what's right and what's good for the larger society. And I found that really affirming. Hey, you know, we're not just Asian, we're American too, you see, you know, we know we belong to this nation dedicated to this proposition of equality. So you're right, it is kind of a strange place to be right now, though, because we are benefiting from Prop 209. We're going to be the majority of the undergraduate population in about 4 years. And yet, many of us don't agree with Prop 209.
I mean, I think it's very good that we have this unique vantage point, both as a, you know, somewhat privileged, yet having the point of view.
But I think it's very important for us to speak out.
Exactly.
We can't be silent on this issue, and that's why, you know, I've decided.
I know a lot of my friends are.
I have to be out there in the forefront of the fight.
What do you think would be a good reason to present to, you know, let's say my, you know, Asian friends who do support affirmative action, but they're mostly, you know, they're not, you know, politically active or politically.
Well,
you know,
remember what I told you upstairs. You know, it's through the political activity that you gain greater clarity of the world. But tell them about my California Equality Initiative, the CEI, and you can find it on the web, you know, through The Nation magazine. Share it with them. And I think that there will be Asian American community organizations that will mobilize behind this pro-affirmative action initiative. But this would be a chance for your Asian American friends to become involved and not to just say, oh yes, I support affirmative action, but to act on their beliefs. Okay, well, thanks for letting me share my evening with you. Hello, I see you have strangers from a different shore. Huh?
Right, I'm in Mr. Sato's class at the Merit.
Oh, Merit, yes, I know. Sato uses my book.
Yes, he does.
Okay.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, so you're a student at Merit. Good.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Looking to get my nursing career going.
Oh, okay. Is that what you're planning to do?
Yeah, registered nurse.
You know, you need to know this history because a lot of the patients you'll be working with will be Asian American patients. Yes, you need to know them in terms of, you know, there are multiple dimensions. So they're not just patients, but they're also Asian Americans. And so it's good to know their history so you can relate to them and offer quality health care.
Absolutely. I'm also trying to learn Cantonese on my own.
Cantonese?
Yes.
Oh, great. Oh, man, I have a story to tell you there. My stepfather was Cantonese speaking. He was Chinese, Kun Kyu Yang. and he had a stroke, and didn't know it was a stroke, and we took him to the hospital, and the doctors couldn't diagnose him, you see. But you know, my dad couldn't speak English. My stepfather couldn't speak English that well, but I was thinking, gee, what if he had been attended to by somebody who could speak Cantonese? Maybe then they would find out that, hey, you know, you are paralyzed in one leg.
I've got a sort of a same type of story. I was working security at the Summit Medical Center in the emergency room, and had this family brought in a young girl, and he couldn't speak very much English, and I recognized some of the Vietnamese words because I'd been in Vietnam. And with putting our knowledge together, I got the story that she had taken too much of a certain type of medicine, and she was having a bad reaction to it. So we got her medical care on the spot rather than having to wait.
Wow.
But understanding goes a long way.
Your smattering of Vietnamese language made a difference then.
Yes.
Those kids made a difference. Saved a life, possibly.
Yes.
Oh.
They got enough knowledge to know they had to pump their stomach out.
In fact, you know, I went to this conference of the Association of American Medical Colleges just a week ago in New Orleans. And 3,000 doctors attended this conference, and they were all like faculty in medical schools. And one of the issues raised at this conference is the need for students in medical school to take a multicultural course before they graduate, because they need to know their patients in terms of this diversity of culture out there. And the American Medical Association knows that in the 21st century, we will all be minorities.
That's it.
You see.
That's it.
And there's another reason why it's important to know this, and that medical research has to be multicultural. It has to look at like the different kinds of medical needs out there, and this can influence the kind of research